So today's topic is going to be about cloud computing service model. So the show Tech Talk Wednesday with Kazim is about talking technologies, and I mentioned that I'm going to be focusing more on Microsoft technologies, cloud computing, Microsoft Power Platform, and maybe sometimes on the show too, based on requests from the listeners, so we can make some other topics happen. So today's topic is going to be about cloud computing service models. So you see, before we subscribe to a cloud service, it is important that we understand the different cloud computing models. So this will guide our decision when we're about to go with a particular cloud service. So there are three cloud models that we can pick from, and the three cloud models include IaaS, that is infrastructure as a service. We have the second one as PaaS, platform as a service, and then we have the third one as software as a service, SaaS. So I'll come again on that. IaaS is the first one, infrastructure as a service. There is PaaS, platform as a service, as the second, and there is the third one, software as a service. So you might want to ask, what is the difference between these three different cloud models? For the IaaS, for the infrastructure as a service, vendors, that's the cloud provider now, is responsible for managing the infrastructure. That is, the difference here between hosting some of these things on premises, the way we're used to doing it in the past, is that if I need to have an application installed on the server that my users are going to connect to, I'm going to need to set up my infrastructure. I need to have a functional network in place. I need to invest on buying systems. I need to procure hardware systems. I need to buy licenses, for those softwares that I want to be installed. And I also need to have a technical person on ground to man, that solution that I'm deploying. So that's how we're used to doing it in the past. But now with cloud computing, with infrastructure as a service, you can pretty much, still host your application, but this time you are hosting it in the cloud, in the data center of some of these service provider like Microsoft Azure, is a very popular one that people, know. I mentioned, in the last episode that, Fortune 500 companies, leverage this, provider. So with IaaS, you don't necessarily need to, you don't have to, you don't need to have an infrastructure set up. So all you need to do is pay the cloud provider, and you can spin up like a virtual machine. So you have your virtual machine, a machine running up in the cloud. And so, if you were to be hosting these things on premises, you will need to worry about providing cooling, for the system. You need to worry about providing power, for the systems that you have on premises. And these things are not very cheap. Here in this part of the world, you don't only rely on the electricity company for power. So you need to back up your power as well. You need to have another layer of backup. What happens if your generator or your generating set packs up, most especially when you're running a business. So you need to have, a layer of redundancy with power. So power is not something that is cheap, in this part of the world that we're in. So cloud computing fits, it fills that gap for us. So when we leverage cloud computing, you simply can have your machines with your applications run in the cloud, and all you need to connect to it is internet access. So that, on the IaaS side. The second one is the PaaS, the platform as a service. So the platform as a service is more for the developers. Maybe I should also mention that the IaaS is more used by system administrators. A number of times system administrators want to install certain softwares and they need to install it on the server. So instead of having to host the server locally, they host it in the cloud. But with the platform as a service, it is more for those people who are into programming. The programmers don't want to worry about patching systems. They don't want to worry about operating system crashing all of the time on them. So when they want to get to work, they just want an environment where they can get to work very quickly with all the necessary IDEs. That's the integrated development environment of their choice. So if you have a developer who is used to coding .NET, who is used to coding Java, for instance, who want to do some bit of PHP, so they just want to connect to that environment that gives them access to all of those different tools that they need to make their development happen. And that's exactly what the platform as a service is for. It's for developers who are looking to get to work very quickly, so they don't have to worry about a number of the infrastructural stuffs. So that's for the developer. And a very good example of a PaaS service is something known as Azure App Service. Azure App Service. So Azure App Service is a platform as a service tool that developers can leverage when they want to build a website. So a developer needs to build a website, is going to first of all need to create this app service, and then they can look at building their website inside of this app service. So using or leveraging on this app service allows them to scale up and down at will. That's one of the advantages, that's one of the characteristics of cloud computing. It makes it very seamless if you need to scale up or you need to scale down. Maybe I should elaborate a little bit more on that for the non-techie people, listeners that are listening to me now. When I say scaling up and down, sometimes with cloud computing, you get this advantage of pay as you go. So when you are not using a service, the provider simply is not charging you for it. So they only get to charge you for that particular service when you are consuming that service. So there might be a time when you have a number of customers. If you're using it for your business, you have a number of customers connecting to that your application. And what you've subscribed for, at the beginning is something that cannot cater for that traffic. So leveraging on cloud computing makes it easy for you to easily scale up. And if you also get to the period where you have low customers, low connectivity to that your particular service, is also very easy for you to scale in. So that's what I mean by scaling out and, scaling in. And, when the developers leverage this particular service allows them to develop their websites with, their programming language of choice, whether they want to code using Java, they want to code using .NET, they are pretty much free to do so. So the last one is the SaaS. Software as a service, again, is what the SaaS stands for. And with software as a service, the software is owned and managed by the cloud provider. So the software now doesn't belong to, the consumer or, the business. It is being owned by the provider. And, the cloud provider now gives the consumer, the business or, an individual that wants to, use this service. They give them on-demand access to this application, that they want on the the SaaS platform. So the very good thing about this is that they can consume this application without the application having to be installed on their computer. A number of times you want to use an application, the generic application that we're used to, we need to have it installed on our device. But in this case, you can consume a SaaS application without the need to have it installed on your device. All you need to consume these applications is that you have a web browser on that device of yours. So whether you're using a computer, you're using your mobile gadgets, so you need to just have a browser. A browser can be, I'm talking about, Mozilla, the Internet Explorer, the Edge, is what is known as now, or we're using Chrome. So any of the web browser of your choice is just as good to consume this SaaS application. And a very popular example of SaaS is Office 365. Office 365. So I bet a number of us knows what Office 365 is about. So Office 365 is a very popular SaaS application. There are a number of services that comes with Office 365 that can help us as individuals, or that can also help us if you have a business running. So Office 365, let me mention a little bit about Office 365, and let's hope that maybe sometimes in the future we can have one of the sessions dedicated to just Office 365. So Office 365 allows us to use a number of business applications that we're used to. They are not applications that is alien to us. I'm thinking that we should take a little break now, and when we're back, so I can throw more light on it. All right, so you're welcome back, listeners. So before we went on break, I was talking about example of SaaS, and I mentioned Office 365. So I said Office 365 comes bundled with a number of business applications that a number of us are already used to. And, what makes it so user-friendly, or what makes it so economical, that's Office 365 and SaaS, in general, is the fact that if I need to run a collaborative tool, in my enterprise, I'm assuming I have a business now, and I need to run a tool that will allow me collaborate. There's one popular tool we can use to do that. SharePoint is a very popular collaboration tool. It can do a number of other things. So for you to set up SharePoint, you're going to have to invest on infrastructure. You need to do licensing, etc. So if I need to do email as well, I need to have a server, the traditional way of setting up email for the enterprise. You need to have a server, you need to procure licenses, so on and so forth. I need to buy Office applications, and imagine, you need to buy Microsoft Office license for maybe 20, maybe 50 or 100 of your staff, that you have in your enterprise. But the cool thing with Office 365 is that it comes with all of these known applications, and you only need to pay a certain amount, just a little amount, to be able to consume all these services, services like Office, Microsoft Office, the Word, the Excel, the publisher that we're used to. So it comes with Office 365. You see, if you want to build a site, we know the tool that allows us to build a site, Microsoft platform is SharePoint, or that allows you to collaborate. Teams is another very good one. So all of these very powerful tools just comes bundled into Office 365. So Office 365 is a very good example of a SaaS. So I think I should try to wrap up now and wait for your questions. So if you have any questions for me. So on today's show, I've walked you through the different cloud service models. So I've mentioned that we have 3 cloud service models. IaaS is one of them, infrastructure as a service. I've talked about PaaS, platform as a service. And I said platform as a service is more for the developers. And I've mentioned SaaS, software as a service. And software as a service is more for the consumer, so the consumers consume more of the SaaS. And, knowing these different cloud offerings, these different cloud models can help inform our decision when we have a cloud service that you are about to subscribe to, whether as an individual or as a business. So I will take your questions now.
All right. If you want to join in the conversation, if you want to call in and ask a few questions, you can call the number 0805 5555957, 0805 5555957. It is the tech show, and of course, Kazim is here to answer your questions. Now, Fumi was going to, ask a question. All right.
I have a question concerning the models you mentioned.
Okay.
Out of all those models, which one is more affordable for consumers?
For consumers, okay, that will be software as a service.
Okay.
I said software as a service because if you need to do IaaS, it will mean that you need to have a virtual machine running in the cloud that you're going to pay for. And when you also have services, you have applications running on the virtual machine, you get to pay for those applications as well. So what you need really, as a small business, if you're talking about small business, is just access to those tools for you to get to work really very quickly. So you're not thinking IaaS and you're not thinking PaaS because you're not a developer. So the best bet for you is to do SaaS. So I'll give you an instance. If you want to do Office 365 and you have 5 users, on your network, or in your business, you're manning about 5 employees, you can subscribe for Office 365 for as low as $5 per user. Whereas if you need to set up a virtual machine in the cloud, so you need to set up the virtual machine, they are going to charge you for the virtual machine. You need to set up email, you're going to be charged for that. So it's just cheaper to go
that
with SaaS.
$5 per user, is it for a week? Is it on a weekly basis or what?
Okay, no. It's usually a monthly charge. Okay, and sometimes there's an upfront cost when you're not doing when you're not doing a huge number of users. So you will need to commit to a year in advance. Make a 12-month payment. Although the analysis is still per month, but you make a commitment fee of a year.
Wow, interesting.
And most of the cloud provider, by the way, have this thing we call the pricing calculator that can help you make comparisons. So you want to, compare this vendor with this other vendor. So, on the Microsoft platform, we have this Azure pricing calculator that can help you guide you through that decision-making process.
Interesting. All right, another question. Now, we've been talking about cloud computing for 2 weeks now. This is the second week. And we know that so many hackers are out there. How secure are informations on cloud? How secure are they? Okay,
that's a very good question. Part of the worries, about some businesses or individuals migrating to the cloud is security, just like you've, raised the question now. The kind of security that we have with being put in place by these cloud providers is not security that we can meet or we can match if we were to set up this infrastructure on our own. So they have regulatory bodies, there are regulatory requirements that this cloud provider work with to make sure that they put a number of these security best practices in place. So the cloud is really a very safe place to be. I'll give an example. So if you're doing storage in the cloud, for instance, so storage in the cloud, yes, you will need to connect to consume your files in the cloud.
Okay.
So there is a need for you to put a username and a password, but that's not where the bus stops. So there are other, if you need to take the security a step further, so you can leverage on encryption keys, that many of these providers provide, on the platform.
So information are very secure.
Very secure in the cloud.
Interesting. Chocolate, do you have any questions?
But it doesn't change the fact that there's still a third party to it, right?
There is a third party, but before going with any cloud provider, you will need to sign up to an SLA. So it's a question of looking through the SLA, making sure that it meets your requirements regulatory-wise and also, maybe business-wise before you choose to go with that cloud provider.
All right. Is there some sort of yardstick or measures that puts the consumer now in the know of which alternatives to use and which is easier? I know you mentioned that it depends on what the person wants, but how can they know who to even meet, or which of the cloud providers to work with?
Yes, they unfortunately, they will need to have somebody that can help them make that decision.
Okay.
For instance, if it's for a business, they can trust it to the administrators. The administrators should be skilled enough to compare between the cloud providers and come to a conclusion. So one of the things they want to look out for is something that we call vendor lock-in.
Okay.
Vendor lock-in is a scenario where some cloud providers, get in your data, they get you to host your data with them. But if later in the future you need to move the data out, it becomes a very big bottleneck. So they need to watch out for that. Be sure that the vendor is not, such that, they will fall into that, what I've just mentioned now. Vendor lock-in is one. Another is support, the amount of support they're getting from the provider. So they want to be sure to go with a provider that they can easily get support when they run into issues. So maybe they want to ask, a number of their other colleagues, I want to do this particular task. There's this particular task I'm looking at doing. What service provider are you using, or do you recommend?
Exactly.
But I would like them, it's best that they trust this to the administrators.
All right.
And I also forgot, I came into the studio with...
okay, you want her to introduce herself?
Perhaps. And
all right, great.
Maybe she also has a question to ask.
All right, do you have a question to ask? Okay, great. Talking to the mic.
Move closer to the mic. All right, just go ahead. The mic does not bite. Go ahead. Be free.
So the question.
Can you speak into the mic?
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, continue.
Okay. So my question is: does cloud actually crash because of multiple users and storage issues? So that's just something.
Wow,
I'm
that's a
conscious
good
about.
question.
Okay. If people can experience a system crash in the cloud. The cloud, I hope that we all know this, that we're not talking about the literal cloud here.
Yes.
So the cloud is just a data center, that a number of these providers have invested very heavily, in setting up. So the cloud providers, they've put a number of measures in place. We, the techie people, like to call it redundancy. So they have layers upon layers of redundancy that they've put in place, such that if you have, for instance, an hardware crash, you don't even get to notice it. Plus the fact that they have these data centers all around the world. So if let's just pretend that there's a natural disaster. So the chances that the natural disaster is not going to be everywhere. So the natural disaster might be in a particular region. So automatically those services will switch, are going to be hosted, in those other regions that the cloud providers do have.
Okay.
So those are some of the things that you want to also trust your administrator to figure out. How many data centers does this cloud providers provide, so on and so forth.
Wow, interesting.
Well, because of time, I know that you will be very much discreet about it because you're a tech person. Now, on a scale of, and I want to put you on the spot now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how very effective would you tell a user that this cloud is
Cloud
very
computing,
safe?
yeah.
Exactly, cloud computing is very safe on a scale of 1 to 10.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 9. Nothing is 100% foolproof.
I like your honesty.
True.
Yes, but 9 of 10.
9 of 10.
They should go with cloud computing. So if they have that choice to make.
All right, great. This is very exciting. I enjoyed today's topic. If you want to join in the conversation, it comes up for now every 1:30 to 2 p.m. So you would have him come on here to talk about the tech show and what he will be having for you next week. In conclusion, what would you have to say to those listening? because of time.
Okay, because of time, I think we can continue this conversation on social media. And sometimes, too, I try to put up a little article on some of the topics and then share on my personal blog. So maybe they want to check out kazim.com.ng. To read about, some of these topics that I've talked about. And, on social media, it is Tech Talk Wednesday with Kazim. And they can also look, up for some of this information on the Lasso CBT 18.com website.
All right. So there you have it. That's the show for today. The Lunch Hour Drive continues. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, the lady did not introduce herself anyway. So tell them your name.
Yeah. My name is Kausar, an intern of Lasso CBT 18.
All right. Good to have you on the radio today.
Welcome to the tech world. So many information that I need to digest. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Now, I'm quite sure that listeners understand what
you for
cloud
having
computing
me.
is all about. I'm quite sure this series will continue next week.
Yes, the January month is for cloud computing.
Okay,
February,
great.
so we're going to be
Yes,
talking
cool.
power apps,
Power.
so
That's
power all the way.
Let's go.
We'll be right back, Lagos. It is still Chocolate and Fumi on the Lunch Hour Drive. Stay close.